Welcome back to the Knowledge Distillation podcast. For today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Nina Schick. Nina has been recognized among the world's 20 best AI speakers, alongside names like Dame Wendy Hall, Sam Altman, and Jeff Hinton. She is a LinkedIn top voice on AI, and she has a community of over 100,000 members. Nina has a fascinating background. She started in geopolitics, advising global leaders, including Joe Biden. She saw the wave of deepfake technology arriving and predicted the profound impact that AI technologies would have on society and the economy. Nina has since switched from advising policymakers to working directly with industry and these AI builders. Nina shares her opinions with us on AI and politics, deepfake technology, and the impact AI is going to have in 2024. Hi, Nina. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be here.
So I had the pleasure of meeting you last year where you were presenting an generative AI summit event that I attended. And I was really impressed by how well you explain really complex ideas in a really understandable way. So I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast, and I'm really excited to hear about your kind of takes on what's going on in the AI space today.
Likewise, and I should say I was just as impressed by your deep expertise and how well you were able to explain very technical and complicated concepts. So pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So as an introduction, your background, you wear many hats, you've got a really interesting background. So I'd love for you to talk to us about how you started in geopolitics and how you got into AI.
Sure, absolutely. So I've always been really interested in like the macro picture of the world, maybe because I grew up internationally. I'm half Nepalese, I'm half German. I've kind of made London my adopted home. And when I started my career, I was working at a think tank in Westminster, focusing on then the very kind of obscure issue of UK-EU relations. And this was just before the kind of Brexit bomb was about to go off. And it was a very kind of tumultuous time geopolitically for not only the UK, but all of Europe and around the world, in part because this then started becoming a prevalent trend in my career, was that the exponential technologies associated with computing and then laterally with artificial intelligence, their application and their implementation in the real world, we were starting to see what a huge impact they had, not only kind of at a macro geopolitical geopolitical level as a tool of economic success for nation states and private companies, mostly kind of the big private tech companies, but also because these capabilities were being rolled out in a way that were now accessible to billions of people around the world, right? So we kind of saw that with the Arab Spring in 2011, and then I started working on issues like the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2013. So increasingly started seeing what was happening in the information ecosystem, how new this all was in terms of how quickly kind of technology was disrupting geopolitical realities, and started becoming more and more of an expert in information operations, the information ecosystem, and basically the weaponization of social media. And a lot of that was seeded from 2011 onwards in the European ecosystem. And then, of course, the big culmination was the very controversial election in 2016 in the United States. So I started becoming an advisor to global leaders on disruptive technology because I thought it was just absolutely fascinating. By 2017, I was working with Joe Biden and Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO Secretary General. And that's when I noticed this weird, strange thing appearing on some dark corners of the internet. And what it was what's now known as deepfake pornography, right? And in the timeline of this entire story, it was just that was the first viral manifestation of AI's new capabilities, right? What we've seen AI being able to do over the past decade with deep learning, computation, and data. And now you have this new category of AI, now so-called generative AI. So at that moment, I immediately understood that this was more than just some kind of tawdry women's issue, but that it would have huge implications on the information ecosystem itself, because I'd been working on mis and disinformation and information warfare. So I just decided to go deep into that world, kind of left my advisory roles because I just wanted to concentrate on what was happening with AI in this space. And I ended up writing the first book on deepfakes, which was the first kind of broader societal take on AI-generated content. And of course, that was just the beginning of the story for me, because I very soon came to understand that it wasn't only about mis or disinformation or synthetic media, but that AI's new capabilities that are emerging are going to transform society and the world in a much more profound way than just, this impact it could have on the information ecosystem.
One follow-up question on the geopolitics side, you really saw how AI was going to have this profound impact on geopolitics back when you were working in that space. What's going on today with AI and geopolitics? I mean, AI having an impact on geopolitics and vice versa. Geopolitics and AI, I mean, it's huge.
On the nation state level, there seems to be a sense of, okay, everyone's just talking about AI safety. And that's because there have been lots of declarations. And we had like the AI safety summit here actually in the UK, which was strategically and symbolically quite a coup for the British government, that they were the first to host it. All the kind of major countries attended, including the United States and China. And at the end of that, we had this kind of cursory commitment to adopt AI safely. But so one might get the sense that, okay, the whole world is moving in the direction where we believe that we need to develop the technology safely, but we also want to look at the opportunities. But in reality, if you look at the different markets and the different regional approaches, you have very different regional approaches to AI developing. And my personal view is that the US is just miles ahead. I don't think anyone can compete. I mean, just look at the kind of private investment into the space. Look at kind of the debate. I mean, we were just talking before we started recording about the kind of even government funding, federal funding for semiconductors and chips, like actually getting that infrastructure off the ground. And the fact that a lot of the private companies who dominate the infrastructure as well as the platform, as in they own it, they're building it, and it's going to be diffused around the world, already is, they're US companies. So I just think the US is on a trajectory that no one else can kind of compete with. You have China, and there's been so much over the past, 20 years, and particularly over the past decade, about US tech dominance being challenged by China. But I don't think that it is. I think that the US is still miles ahead of China, in part because the Chinese central government also has a pretty complicated relationship with the tech behemoths in China. And again, if you think about the penetration of cloud or even hardware or these foundational models, I mean, which companies dominate? It is absolutely the US companies. So I think you kind of have the US here. China obviously will invest a lot more, but I think the US is its own beast. And then you have other regions, right? You have the UK, which is trying to be this bridge between Europe and the US. You have Europe, which is going to obviously go hard on data and privacy and regulation. And I think my personal view on this is, again, having worked with policymakers, it's just not enough being done on innovation, which is sad because so much of the talent, right, in terms of the research and the very few people who can actually build the models or work on the technical infrastructure, a lot of Europe punches above its weight in terms of providing the talent. Very interesting region is the Gulf, because that's an area, especially in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, where the governments are investing heavily. And they understand that actually owning part of this critical infrastructure and platform is a national security interest, vital national security interest for them. And then, of course, the second thing that you have to comment on, because it's undeniable, is that we've already seen the rise of the kind of tech giant, right? The global tech giants. And I think what's happening with artificial intelligence is going to augment their dominance because of how they are in the unique position to build and deploy both the infrastructure, but also the platform, and then everybody else kind of plugs in on the application layer. So you have these private or public companies who are just so influential and powerful and will capture a lot of the values.
And one more thing on the politics theme. This year, obviously, is a huge year for elections. AI is going to have a huge influence on elections this year, right? This probably moves us nicely onto deepfakes as well. What do you see AI, kind of the good and the bad, benefits and disadvantages of AI for elections this year?
Yeah, great question. So obviously, given that I worked on election integrity and mis and disinformation, and deepfakes was like kind of my whole entry point, I should be like, yes, this is the election. This is what I've been warning about. This is like AI is going to change every election result. But I actually don't think that, because even though you have these new capabilities that have been democratized that allow individuals or entities to create AI-generated content at scale, which could be then used for mis and disinformation, we were already facing, long before AI was in the picture, we were already facing a corroded information ecosystem, right? So it doesn't need to be a very sophisticated deep fake. If you were to look at all the mis and disinformation in the context of all the elections that are coming up this year, AI isn't going to be the category that is most abundant, shall we say. Nonetheless, you will see some instances of AI-generated content being used to kind of try to swing an election, like in the case where Joe Biden, a synthetic video of Joe Biden was being utilized to try and suppress voter turnout. But I think the bigger and more important question, and this is something that I wrote about in my book, which came out a few years ago, is about information integrity itself, meaning trust. Meaning, look, we all live in this digital ecosystem. We have access to so much information. There's going to be a whole wall of AI-generated data and content and information heading our way too. Even if it's not synthetic, we're going to get more content. And now we have the knowledge and the understanding that anything can be synthesized, right? Including video, which we tend to see as an extension of our own perception. You seeing is believing. We have kind of those kind of statements. That is no longer true. So seeing is no longer believing. So then the problem is really one of trust. How do you trust anything? And when you feel like you can't trust anything and you become a cynic and everything can be fake and nothing can be real, then that's when you start to lose trust in institutions, in election results, in processes. And I think it's that declining of trust, which has already been a factor of public life for, the last few decades, declining of trust in the electoral process, in political leaders, and in public institutions. That's going to be the really kind of pernicious thing that is, again, a bigger piece of just like this, feels like our society in the way that we built it is no longer able to deal with the challenges of the age of AI and the kind of the digital information age as well.
You mentioned your book already, so I wanted to talk a bit about that. So it was released in 2020. Infocalypse, is that right?
Yeah, it's so funny. When I chose the title of the book, it was like there was people were talking about the information apocalypse, so the Infocalypse. But now, in retrospect, after 3 years of no one being able to pronounce it, I'm like, just call it Deepfakes. The book is called Deepfakes. Yeah, exactly.
So maybe take a step back. What are deepfakes? Why did you decide to write this book? And how has this kind of world of deepfakes changed since you published the book?
So a deepfake is essentially, it's now, when I was writing the book, there wasn't even a lot of the kind of terminology around what now we know as kind of generative AI or these new emerging capabilities with AI wasn't established. So a few years down the line, I think what a deep fake has kind of come to mean in the common parlance is a piece of synthetic content, i.e. AI generated content or AI manipulated content, which synthesizes someone's biometrics. So an AI generated video of you or of me saying or doing something I didn't do, or an image, right? So some sort of synthetic content which purports to be someone and misrepresents them in a way that is usually malicious. The very first manifestation of a deepfake, again, stealing someone's biometrics and synthesizing them, is in non-consensual pornography. Because just like in the case of the internet itself, porn was the pioneering use case. So what was happening when this started, it emerged on the internet as this like absolute phenomenon on Reddit at the end of 2017. AI generated fake porn videos of women. And what had been happening in the run-up to that was that we had seen like these significant advances in deep learning. So the expanding capabilities of artificial intelligence. A lot of really interesting stuff was happening in AI research kind of in the 2012s onwards. So by 2017, you have some of these like really cutting edge research capabilities leaking out of the AI research community and being seized upon by early enthusiasts who are probably machine learning geeks. They know something about VFX. And then they discovered, hey, we can take these new generative abilities by using the right training data, which in this case is just someone's biometrics, and using loads and loads of that as training data to basically make this hideous new creation, which is fake pornography, right? And images were a lot easier to do because it's a single frame. Videos are a lot more difficult, but it immediately became, it's a gendered phenomenon. It's universally targeted against women. And not only celebrities, even though celebrities were the early victims, like Maisie Williams, Emma Watson, famous celebrities, Gal Gadot, but increasingly it also became something that's just weaponized against normal women. So I picked up on that. And I was working at the time, as I already mentioned, in the context of election interference for the NATO Secretary General and global leaders, including Joe Biden. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't like any other form of disinformation we've seen, because we're talking about video. And again, for the first time, we're talking about machines that will, even though it's not autonomous now, will increasingly be able to generate this kind of content autonomously and at scale. So while I was researching for the book, I started speaking to a lot of the founding or the pioneering companies who are on the cutting edge of what is called generative AI, right? So the OpenAIs, the Synthesias, and started learning that this isn't only about, okay, people are going to weaponize this and make fake content, but this is much more than just synthetic content. Again, you're starting to really talk about highly capable machine systems that are going to be woven into the very kind of ecosystem and fabric of the digital infrastructure and going to have a real impact on the economy, on life, on our perception of what it means to be human. So I just started understanding that it's a much bigger story than what I had originally identified.
So as we are recording this, we're just in the midst of the Taylor Swift scandal, where someone had uploaded the deepfake pornography of her, and the X response was just to stop allowing searches of Taylor Swift, or her name, Taylor Swift. Surely there's a more robust response to this kind of deepfake problem. What do you think about that as a resolution from X?
Guess what? The tech solutions to battle this already exist. And it isn't that there's one solution. I'll talk a little bit about the kind of solutions. because you have to think about it as building resilience, right? It's just like cybersecurity. You need layers of defense. So when Twitter comes up with something as inane and as weak, as wet as that, you're like, come on. Because the platforms have to be more willing, or they have to adopt some of the technical solutions that exist to combat scaled mis and disinformation that is either generated by AI or not. And when you're talking about synthetic content, one of the approaches that exists, and this was initially the first approach that people thought we need to adopt, is to build detectors, AI detectors, to detect synthetic content. But it's always going to be an adversarial race, because there's no one-size-fits-all detector, and as soon as you build a model that has some kind of accuracy, it can be defeated, and it can never give you 100% accurate results, right? The best a detector can do is give you a probability of how confident it is that that piece of content is AI generated or not. So there's always a chance for a false negative or a false positive, which again ties back to this bigger question I was talking about, the information, about the sanctity of information integrity itself. Because if you can't trust anything because you're like, oh, well, that's not 100% accurate. It's and I'm in, that's only 80% accurate, and I'm in the 20% that believes that this is actually not synthetic. Again, it just corrodes trust. Another approach is called content authenticity and provenance. And this is the idea that rather than try to detect everything that's fake or synthetic, and by the way, let's be real, the vast amount of content and data that is going to be generated by AI is not going to be malicious. So simply detecting everything that is AI generated ultimately is going to be a totally futile exercise, because everything is going to be generated by AI at some point, right? So you're just detecting everything. Okay. But that philosophical question aside, rather than try to detect everything that's synthetic or AI generated, we need to be able to show the provenance or the origins of all content, whether it's synthetic or not synthetic, that we should be transparent about the origins of all content. So how do you actually do this? Well, you can do this like cryptographic hashing, where you can seal in the DNA of content information that shows you whether this is AI generated or not. And it's much more than a watermark, because a watermark can be edited or removed, but this actually lives in the DNA of the content. The problem is, it's not enough to just adopt that kind of signing solution. It's fine to sign it, but you need to be able to see those credentials where you encounter the content, right? In this case, Twitter. And to do that, you need to have an open standard that's widely accepted, adopted across the internet. And the best analogy would be, the HTTPS lock when you're on a secure website, like that. And that open standard is actually being developed already by an organization known as the C2PA to actually put this into the very architecture of the internet itself. And by the way, the founding members of the C2PA include big players like Microsoft and Adobe. And, I'm sure that the Googles and the Metas are kind of hovering around this as well. So it's basically the infrastructure to authenticate content. But that's tricky. It's going to take a long time. And even then, let's just say in an ideal world, you have this adopted and you see the Taylor Swift fake content on Twitter, and you can see the content credentials because the open standard's been adopted and implemented by Twitter and Meta and Google. Still, people are, first of all, they're going to misuse the technology. And second, just because you see something as AI generated is not necessarily going to, especially when you have such levels of declining trust, you're not necessarily going to convince people that, not necessarily going to convince them to change their mind. So huge challenges, but I mean, for the low-hanging fruit, like obviously AI-generated pornographic Twitter content of Taylor Swift on Twitter, take it down, Twitter. Just take it down. This low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do. You could do it.
Nice. Call to action. The other question I would have with the authenticity or the tools to authenticate is there will always be a team of people that are trying to hack the latest secure authenticity technology. So it will always be a kind of adversarial cat and mouse game, even when you have these brilliant standards.
Absolutely.
So there is a company, you advise a couple of companies, or there's at least a couple of companies that I know about that you advise, one of which is Truepic. Could you tell us about Truepic? I think they're very much linked to this authenticity technology that you just described.
Yeah.
So
that's what they do. Yeah, they build kind of like the authentication tech. And I mean, they have like pioneering world-class technology to do this, which can either be in software form or in hardware form, meaning it can actually be embedded into the lens of your not your iPhone, unless, Apple were to want to do that, which they haven't done, but technically it's possible. They've already embedded it into the device of certain cameras, working with Leica and Canon, for example. So the technical know-how is there, but it also depends on implementation and adoption, but on the hardware side. But it can also be done as a software, right? So you can download their app and then basically use their app to do secure capture. And the really interesting thing about working with Truepic is that we came together at the very beginning of the story, which was when deepfakes were first starting to emerge, and we realized that, there is going to be a problem when the information ecosystem is inundated with AI-generated content, and you combine that with kind of just declining levels of trust. It not only affects society from a kind of political perspective. I mean, I was initially looking at it from the perspective of information integrity, but how is business? I mean, it's imperative to business to also be able to trust the information ecosystem and the information that is going into the business. So they already have we have obviously this bigger philosophical debate about information integrity and authentication and authenticity, but they already work with a lot of businesses like auto manufacturers for car insurance claims, or with financial institutions who need to be able to authenticate the kind of images that come in order to do their work. Otherwise, if they can just be like a deluge of synthetically generated content, being like, "Oh, my car crashed. Here's the photograph." It's not going to work. So it's kind of already tried and tested. Invest tech, they call it, in certain industries. But we also have this kind of broader non-profit remit, which is about trying to adopt open standards, make authentication a key component of the actual backbone of the internet. And it's been fascinating because over the last few years, especially as so-called generative AI has advanced in terms of its capabilities and the influence of these frontier AI companies, you have all the big players in the room, right? From the Microsoft to the OpenAIs to the Adobes, who understand that this is going to be hugely important.
The other company that I know of that you advise as well is the kind of the flip side of the coin, where they are generating this synthetic media. So Synthesia is a London-based or UK headquartered company. So I've been following them quite eagerly over the past couple of years. But yeah, could you tell us about Synthesia and what is the state of AI-generated video today? It's not a solved problem as far as I know. Like we sort of see text to image is fairly solved today, but what's the state in the video space?
My kind of portfolio on AI, if you will, or my experience is perfectly demonstrative or indicative of both the yin and the yang of AI. So I care about information integrity, care about authenticity, working with Truepic, and of course, Synthesia is one of the world's first AI avatar generation platforms. And on their platform, I mean, they basically work with over 70% of the Fortune 500 already, who use their software to generate avatars, and they have actors who are compensated for their work anytime like their likeness is used in a synthetic video, or their clients will come to them for a bespoke avatar. And what do they use this for? Well, they use it for training videos, for internal communications, for, banal kind of admin-y things that previously might have been communicated in an email or an Excel spreadsheet. Well, now guess what? You can just type in the script with a few clicks of a button. You can generate it into a video, and you can translate it into a multitude of languages. But of course, this ties into fascinating questions about extension of IP, about who owns the right to a digital likeness. And you're already starting to see all these debates happening in Hollywood, but also about how your own likeness should be an extension of your IP, right? So all about if somebody uses your likeness, how are they going to pay for it? But ultimately, the fact that video as a mode of communication is going to become far more ubiquitous. It's going to be very cheap to produce videos when it's just software.
I totally see kind of 2024 as a year of text to video, to be honest. 2023 was text to image, and it was just crazy the fidelity and the how impressive the images are now. Video is definitely next, and it's getting better and better. I think last week or the week before, I saw Google have released some paper where instead of doing frame by frame, which is I think how most of the models tend to work, they've actually generated a model of all the frames at once, like generated the video. And yeah, it's coming thick and fast.
It's coming. Yeah, it's coming.
It's still the start of the year. It's actually into February now, but we can still say it's the start of the year. What do you think? What are your predictions? What are the themes that you see of 2024? If you could try and kind of summarize where you think we're going.
I'm obviously influenced by my background and the way that I think about it. But one of the top lines for me is how political this is all going to get in terms of both competition amongst nation states. And we're already starting to see that, right? With like the export controls on NVIDIA's chips to China. And let's see what happens with some of the cloud computing platforms. Let's see what happens with, any new governments that come into place and how they're going to, I'm sure lots will be promising funds and development and making, their country a central for kind of AI research and AI development. But there will be differences that emerge. So I really think there's kind of regional different markets for artificial intelligence, and those countries who are really able to capitalize on the value is going to become more apparent. But I think this is an ongoing trend that's going to be a huge driver of geopolitical realities in this century. And not only AI, but associated technologies that come with artificial intelligence. Second thing is, I expect the giants in the space, meaning mostly the US tech giants, and their partner companies, whether that's Anthropic or OpenAI or Cohere, to become even more dominant because of the way that they can own the lion's share of the infrastructure and the platform, or already do. Of course, we're going to see competition. You and I were talking about this on the case of, GPUs and computation. But I think, it's going to be hard to tackle the dominance of someone like an NVIDIA or a Microsoft partnered with OpenAI, which brings me to my third point, which is that I think this year, you're going to see a lot of these capabilities just being rolled out to the average consumer or the average office worker just as a software update, So people are like, ooh, when will I be able to use AI? And what should my AI strategy be? And, some of the companies who are really thinking about this in terms of, should I be building my own foundational model? Some of the larger enterprises, right? And a lot of the larger companies have already done this, whether it's a Bloomberg or a Deloitte or you're starting to see industry-specific or company-specific LLMs. But I think what's going to happen is that the capability is just going to be rolled out as a software update into your Microsoft office suites. So it's just coming anyway. And for the consumer, I think we're going to start to see AI optimized devices, right? So what Apple is doing. And so again, just being rolled out to billions of people in this way where it isn't necessary. There might be some kind of like fanfare about, oh, this is Copilot's latest update, or, this is Google Suite's latest update. It's got AI in it. But just it's kind of this slow rolling out of these capabilities, which are then going to be accessible to billions of people and will become like a everyday part of life. So, and then finally, I think it will get very political in the sense that all of the fears about automation, about being replaced, about that we already saw in Hollywood, but I think increasingly we're going to see it in knowledge work as well, right? In any form of knowledge work, I think it'll become a political issue. So it'll be interesting to see if any, not only because we have all the elections, but it'll be interesting to see if we kind of start to see like a populist tech bash kind of platform emerge somewhere in the world. And I think it's going to be different in different parts of the world, because some parts of the world, particularly in the West, we tend to be more not techno-optimists, shall we say. We tend to be more skeptical.
I think on the kind of software release point, we're already seeing that. I think Google Chrome latest update now just has loads of built-in AI. It's like AI as a backend.
That's it.
Which is amazing. You have a kind of amazing, huge community of followers. You're a LinkedIn top voice. How should listeners find out more and find out more about what you're talking about and how to follow you?
Yeah, thank you. So you can follow me on my Substack, The Era of Generative AI, or follow me on LinkedIn. We are, like I said, building this community because I think this is the most interesting story of our time. It's about people, it's about power, it's about politics, and it's juicy. So I'm sure there'll be lots of exciting developments this year, and it impacts all of us on such a profound existential level. So I think one of my main messages is, look, you kind of need to understand it in order to really, help yourself, in this era of exponential change.
And Nina writes a great opinion piece on these topics, so go check them out. Thank you, Nina. Thanks for your hot take on these hot topics today.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
It was great to hear Nina's predictions for the year ahead. With the elections happening around the world, the collision of AI and politics is likely to become an increasingly important part of our public debate. I think it's important that alongside the technical discussions that we host on this podcast, that we take the time to reflect on how this technology impacts and interacts with the wider world. As always, you can join the conversation. We're on all the major social media channels @DistillationPod. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review and share with your friends. This show was produced by Ian McKenzie. See you next time.